These days, it seems to be hard to come up with new themes for games. And mind you, there are themes that can be the object of a million games and still be interesting. From Normandy World War II for war games, or trading in the Mediterranean for Euro games. These are immortal themes. But from time to time it is nice to see that someone came up with a really innovative theme. And this is what happens in the game I'm going to tell you about in this video, which is called Bring On Your Dead. Which is a game in which you represent, I guess, you play the role, I guess, of a family, of a clan, or a group of people that are trying to bury their beloved ones. You're trying to bury corpses. They're into coffins, it's all nice and cute and tidy, but this is what the game is about. You're trying to bury them in the best spots. And you know what? It seems so weird, but if I think of like the small town in which I grew up in Italy, how important it was to get grandpa or auntie in the prestigious place in the graveyard, this is not that surreal. It's almost more satirical than surreal. The point here, however, is that you're trying to get the best spots for the coffins that you are delivering to the graveyard. So, pretty peculiar theme, definitely. I would say it's a coffin placement game with a secret selection of burial ground mechanics and a dump grandpa in the river element. Let me clarify that in the rest of my video. The board of the game represents the burial site where the players will try to bury their beloved ones, and it is double-sided. This side here you use for 4 to 5 player, and there is that side for 2 to 3 players. It has less graves that are already dug and available for players to dump in their coffins. Each player has a set of coffins so that they will try to bury in profitable, prestigious locations on the board during the game. Each player also starts with a standard deck of cards. I should call it a hand of cards. Cards have a numerical value and they have an effect, or may have an effect, printed at the bottom. A very common effect is simply that when you resolve this card, a card of this kind, you will add a coffin to the card of the Gravedigger. This other card allows you to add a double coffin to the card of the Gravedigger. We'll talk about that later. And also you have other cards with other effects. Also there is a player aid. There are a lot of icons in this game, and this is not unusual, but some of these icons really kind of look the same. It is good that there's a player aid, but it's kind of small, and I wish that the icons had been differentiated a little bit better, made it more intuitive. I found myself looking at the player aid, looking for the icons that I needed to decipher a little more often than I did in other games and that I would have liked. In any case, you have your hand of cards with an effect and a numerical value. Each player also starts with a purple card and a gray card. These are 2 decks. The purple cards are fate cards, very powerful cards with high numbers very often and powerful effects. And treasure cards also have effects and can be scored at the end of the game. Many can be scored in sets. You need a certain number of cards of the same type in order to score high. So each player starts with a card of each kind in their hands, in addition to their hand of cards. You have a small deck of Gravedigger's cards. These cards represent the cards where the Gravedigger loads the coffins that are going to be buried in the cemetery. Each turn you draw a card from this deck, and this represents the card that is going to be used and that the players are going to load. Each player looks at their hand of cards. Remember, there will also be other cards like this. Looks at their hands of cards and selects 3 secretly. Suppose I want to do this. And he places them face down. Then all players reveal their selection simultaneously. and simply you resolve them. These cards pretty much give you the option, or I should say they reserve a spot for you on the card of the Gravedigger. You resolve the cards of the players going in descending order from the highest values to the lowest value. So I have a 9, I can resolve this card, maybe another player has an 8, the player resolves that card, then there's another player with 8, then it goes back to me 7, and you continue like this until all cards have been resolved. Many cards, as I said, will allow you to add the coffins to the card of the Gravedigger. For example, if I'm resolving this one, then I simply place a coffin here. And I put it here in the first coffin space. Following players that will place coffins next, resolving their effects, will use the other slots. You start from the first coffin slot and you continue until the card is full. And the size of the card depends on the number of players. If you have 2 players, you only fill it up until here. 3, 4, 5 players. So players will simply add their cards, add their coffins, some are single coffins, some are double coffins, until the entire card is maybe loaded. Let's pretend we have 2 players. Well, no, it's just loaded. So you just play until the card is loaded, or in any case until all the cards played by the players have been resolved. It may also be that they played a lot of effects and not many coffins have been actually added to the board. But suppose that that is the case, then once everybody resolved their cards, resolving their effects and placing coffins, it is time to deposit the coffins in the backyard, in the graveyard. Now, each turn there is a first player. The first player decides which side of the graveyard we are going to use. There is one on the left and one on the right. Only one can be used. So let's say I'm first player. I decide that this turn we're gonna put our coffins here. Maybe next turn another player will decide to do that. Now another thing about placement of coffins though. Players, once they have committed their cards, once they have committed to placing coffins on through their cards, they have to place them on the cart. But what happens if all of the slots have been taken? Well, for the time being, the surplus is placed here, and we'll see later what happens. Now, as we said, it is time for the players to assign their coffins to the graveyard. And we start from the first coffin, and this player here decides, for example, to place a coffin here. This player decides to place a coffin here, and this player, suppose, decides to place a coffin here. It's pretty simple. You place the coffins in the slots that you see there. If you have a double coffin, of course, you can only place it in a double slot, a little slot that is big enough, has enough slots to hold the double coffin. The numbers that you see there indicate the amount of victory points that that site is worth it. But sometimes you see a pair of two graves with 2 numbers. That means that each grave has an individual value. This one is worth 3 points, this one is worth 3 points. When you see a pair with a single number, it means that you need to have a coffin in both of the slots to be able to score that number. So if I have a coffin in both of these slots, I score 9. A single one would not score me anything. There are other things of this, of different kind of effects, for example, of different kinds of areas that work in different ways. Here, for example, you must fill this line of graves from the lowest values to the highest value. You cannot just place it on the 7. Here, there is an area that will score you 0 points, but will allow you to draw a green card. Similarly, on the other side, there is an area that also scores no points, but allows you to draw a purple card. A similar area where you place things from low to high. And then you have the mausoleum area, which is this one, which scores you that amount of points if you have dominance, if you're the player with the strongest, largest presence in this area. As for the coffins that unfortunately did not find space on the cart, they did not find a slot on the cart, they end up sploosh in the river. So you put them in the river, which is good and bad. Well, dumping grandpa in the river is really not all that nice. So there should be a penalty if you do so. And in fact, the number of coffins that you have in the river at the end will score you negative points. This is a penalty that you pay based on the number of coffins. 4 coffins in there, it's a huge penalty. However, when you place a coffin in there, you also get to draw a special card, so there is that balancing thing there. It is not good to dump grandpa in the river, but it's not a game-breaking thing. You're not going to be kicked out of the game because, sure, you're going to lose points, but you also get cards that may give you effects, and there also are effects that may allow you to remove the coffins from the river. This is, in essence, the game. You simply retrieve your hand of cards at the end of each bidding round. Again, various game effects may give you several other cards, but at the beginning of each round, you commit 3. You look at the new card that showed up and that is presently available, and different cards have different sizes, as you can see. You try to assess what the players are trying to do. You commit to the cards that you want to play. They will allow you to add the coffins here and to perform and to resolve game effects. You place the coffins in the slots that you think are going to be most profitable to you, and the game is over when all of the cards in the game have been used, or when a player has placed all of their coffins, whichever condition applies first. And at the point, the player with the highest score is the winner of the game. So the theme is definitely weird, but I think it's implemented the way it should, which is humorously, which is tongue-in-cheek. How else could you do it? I guess it could be very serious with a zombie theme, but in those games usually the dead people come out of the graves. You're not pushing them in. So there's a tongue-in-cheekness in the zaniness of the theme to start with, and the art really does a good job of creating the right atmosphere. That art is pretty charming, it's pretty fun. I find it, yes, very, very appealing. I don't think that even young children would have much of a problem playing this game. Not from the art. It's not some scary, impressive monster art like you have in other games. Actually, I played the game at Origins game for 2015, and the group that I was playing it, there were also 2 pretty young kids, not like 4 or 5, but probably around 8. Between 8 and 10 maybe. I'm not that good at telling age, but in any case it seemed to me that young gamers could play. Definitely the mechanics are not too hard to grasp even for a young gamer, and the art is not disturbing, the theme is unusual, but again, it's implemented in such a fun, light-hearted way that I don't see any particular problem there. I don't know that the players, there will be many gamers out there that will run away screaming because they're offended by this game. Maybe they are, and I'm sorry for them, because they're missing out. They're missing out on a simple, pretty fun game. A game that is very intuitive, very easy to understand. The only trickiness is all the game effects that come from certain cards that may take a while to get used to, especially because the icons kind of all look the same or very similar to one another. But it's very intuitive. A turn is split into 2 very separate, very different phases, but they both present interesting challenges and rewards for the player that manages to act effectively. The first one is about reading your opponents, because you have these mighty cards, and of course you're thinking, well, I have the cards that will allow me to load my dead people on the card first. Why don't I just play them all first? Then if they're one-time used, then you don't have them for next time. And maybe other players are thinking the same thing. So actually you have these mighty cards with high values, but if other players are playing those very cards this turn, then actually there are going to be a lot of dead people that are going to be loaded on the card, and that means that some will not find a spot. So you may have a relatively high card, but it just so happens that the players have played even higher cards and they go before you and the card is a small one. Then you spend your best card or cards in your hand with to no avail, even worse actually than your coffins that did not find a proper spot, end up in the river. They even generate negative points at the end. So it is really about reading what the opponents may be doing and trying to figure out ways of sneaking in the coffins when you can make sure that the opponents are not putting too many on the card, and at the same time, if you want to actually take a break from that, instead of putting coffins, you want to use other game effects, then also you need to figure out when it would be the right time to do so to maximize the effectiveness of your game effects. So definitely there is an interesting hand management and the player reading aspect in that selection of the cards that then are revealed and resolved in order to place the coffins on the card. And when it comes then to placing the coffins on the graveyard, or the two sections of the graveyard, a lot of decisions. You can go for the easy strategy, grab a big scoring place, or for a longer term strategy, place your coffins in places that are not worth much at the beginning, but if you manage to place later coffins there, then they would score much more. But maybe somebody will steal that from you. They will just let you do the groundwork, and then they will reap the fruit of your efforts. Dominance. So every time that you have dominance, meaning majority in an area, there are interesting things because you may keep a low profile in an area, look like you're not that interested. Then you play a game effect that allows you to rebury some coffins, then you gain dominance, or you realize that you're not gonna have dominance, then you pull out from there. A lot of different nuances and options even when it comes to the placement of the coffins, thanks to the fact that different areas of the graveyard work in different ways, have different implications and nuances. Simple game, Euro game, family game in the sense of the complexity. Family game to me also because the theme is, it just looks so silly that you can in fact play it with your family. Very accessible, very simple, very intuitive, easy to get into, but with a couple of interesting subtleties that emerge after a turn or two when you realize, pretty much the first time you select your cards, you realize all the mistakes that you made, you realize how you had to think of your selection, not just in terms of what you want to do, but the interaction among the objectives of the players. Then these things emerge and make the game more interesting. So I think that the game really hits a soft spot there because it's simple, easy to teach, very accessible Euro game, but with some interesting decisions and subtleties that emerge after a couple of turns, and that definitely are fun to explore. Bring On Your Dead, probably the most original game I played in 2015 when it comes to the theme, and definitely a very enjoyable one when it comes to the experience of gameplay.